Thank you, Mahauklin. It's Mahauklin. Yeah. Yeah. When I was in England, I've been in England this last week, and I was telling the folks there that I was going to be coming to Dublin to speak, and was going to be speaking at an event sponsored by the Irish Chesterton Society. And they said, well, who runs the Irish Chesterton Society? Of course, I had no chance at pronouncing Mahauklin's name, like I just didn't pronounce it right now. And so I said, yeah, it's run by a guy named Angelo Battoni. And one of the gentlemen, without missing a beat, said, oh, he must be from the Kerry Battonis. All right. This is really cool. You get to hold that. That's yours. Okay, good. All right. You can set it down, too. It doesn't. It's just really irritating. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's just a great pleasure to be here. This is my first trip to Ireland. I've only been here a few hours in Dublin, and it's something that I've often, really wanted to get to Ireland, and this is as good an excuse as any to come and talk to a room full of people. The G.K. Chesterton Society that is sponsoring this, a lot of you have come, you've seen my show, you're probably a little bit familiar with Chesterton, but I'm going to give you just a brief introduction for those who were dragged here against their will. What is the big deal about G.K. Chesterton? He was, during his lifetime, one of the most popular writers in the world. During his lifetime, he died in 1936, everyone knew who Chesterton was. He was quoted all the time. He was read all the time. He was a prolific author. He wrote 100 books. He wrote introductions to 200 more books on all different subjects. He covered the entire gamut of literature. He wrote on theology and philosophy, but also on economics and politics and on art and literature as well. And had a way of putting it all together when he wrote. There was no subject he didn't touch. And even though he was a popular author as a writer of books, wrote a very popular detective series based on a priest detective named Father Brown, who himself was based on an Irish priest named John O'Connor. And those were very popular. He was primarily a journalist, and he wrote for the newspapers, and that's why he was so well known, because people were reading him all the time in periodicals and in newspapers, in major newspapers. And he wrote at least 5,000 literary essays for periodicals. And the work that I'm doing, we are continuing to dig up and find Chesterton's uncollected journalism. And I just want you to think about that number 5,000 for just a minute, because go home tonight and write an essay, because that's what you were going to do anyway. And then if you write another essay tomorrow, then you will have written 2 essays, okay? So that's pretty good. You've got 2 essays written now. If you keep writing an essay every day for the next 15 years, and without taking Sundays off, you'll get pretty close to that number of 5,000 essays. And then you can write that book on St. Thomas Aquinas that you've always wanted to write, and get those novels and plays and the hundreds and hundreds of poems that are burning in your mind. So Chesterton was absolutely prolific, and he had the ability to actually write 2 essays at one time. He could write one out in longhand and dictate an entirely different essay to his secretary at the same time. And see, that would cut your writing time in half. Yes, so. All right. Can you see me behind that pillar there? Is that okay? Is that a good seat there? There's some seats right up here in front, and they only cost €5 more. And you can just pay me directly. That's fine. Yeah, good. Thank you. All right. So, and then of course everything he wrote was under a deadline. So he was always focused on getting that next thing written, and tended to not pay attention to those little things in life that consume our attention. He was what some people would call absent-minded. But he said absent-mindedness simply is present-mindedness about something else. But that's why he once hailed a cab to take him to an address that was across the street. And then getting out of the cab, of course, was the great adventure with Chesterton, because he was about 6'3", 6'4", and 300 pounds plus. And one story has the cab driver saying, "Well, perhaps if you get out sideways, Mr. Chesterton." And he said, "I have no sideways." But he also said he was the politest man in all of England because he could stand up on a bus and offer his seat to 3 women at one time. And yet, there are some people who, because he was so funny, so charitable, and not afraid of making fun of himself and not afraid of making a joke at his own expense, people who just didn't take him seriously. He was a buffoon to some people. He was just an overgrown elf who used to catch buns in his mouth to amuse children at birthday parties. And yet he wrote an essay in the Illustrated London News that inspired Gandhi to start leading a movement for the independence of India, and wrote a book called The Everlasting Man that was read by an Ulster man who was an atheist named C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis found that his life changed completely after reading Chesterton's defense of Christianity, and it led him to Christianity. He also wrote a novel called The Napoleon of Notting Hill that was read by Michael Collins, and it inspired Michael Collins to start a battle with England for the independence of Ireland. And Chesterton loved the Irish. Whenever Chesterton met an Irishman, he would always salute him as a representative of that great and historic nation called Ireland. And the Irish poet Maurice Leahy said that the people of Ireland regarded G.K. Chesterton as an Irishman and George Bernard Shaw as an Englishman. And of course, Shaw, the vegetarian, teetotaling, skeptic, made just the perfect foil for G.K. Chesterton, the meat-eating, beer-drinking, wine-drinking, great believer. And they would have public debates that just would be a great spectacles for the public. And they were personal friends who just did not agree on anything, and so people paid money to watch them argue, and they had some great exchanges. Chesterton sees Shaw and says, "I see there's been a famine in the land." And Shaw responds, "And I see the cause of it." Shaw says, "Gilbert, if I were as fat as you, I'd hang myself." And Chesterton responds, "And if I were to hang myself, I'd use you as the rope." Shaw pokes Chesterton in the stomach with his umbrella and says, "Boy or girl?" Chesterton says, "If it's a boy, I'll name him Gilbert. If it's a girl, I'll name her Mary. If it turns out to be gas, I'll call it George Bernard." But even Shaw himself said to his fellow Irishmen that the world is not thankful enough for G.K. Chesterton. He always defended the Irish. And I think there's 3 important things that he notices about the Irish that he particularly likes, and that are the 3 things that he thinks are so important, which is why he loved the Irish so much. The first, of course, is that wonderful thing that you all know about, and that's Irish bull. Things like, "Well, it's unanimous then, we agree on nothing." Or it's hereditary in his family to not have children. Yeah. If it's Dublin you'd be wanting to go to, I wouldn't be starting from here. Yeah, you know that one. This is a true one. This happened to a friend of mine. This is why I was so anxious to come to Ireland. He was at a train station, and he noticed that the two clocks on the platform had two different times. So he said to the station manager, the clocks have two different times on them. And the station manager replied, well, if the clocks had the same time, I wouldn't need two of them, would I? Well, Chesterton himself, he would use some examples of Irish bull himself. He says there's a good deal to be said for the Irish magistrate who said he would do his duty without swerving to partiality on the one hand and impartiality on the other hand. And he heard this one too that he loved. He says, one man is as good as another and a great deal better. And he said he agreed with the Irishman who said he preferred to prophesy after the event. But he says that Irish bulls are summaries, he says, that are too true to be consistent. He says the Irish make Irish bulls for the same reason that they accept papal bulls. Because it's better to speak wisdom foolishly, like the saints, than to speak folly wisely, like the professors. And Chesterton says an Irish bull is really like Catholic dogma because it's truth told in the form of a contradiction. And all of the great Catholic dogmas have that contradictory nature to them. If you want a book full of paradoxes, well, certainly pick up any book by G.K. Chesterton, but also pick up the Bible. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. If you want to save your life, you have to lay it down. If you want to live forever, you have to be willing to die. If you count it all joy when you meet various trials, and we all do that one. And a virgin shall give birth, and the dead shall rise, and blessed are the poor. All wonderful paradoxes, which I'm sure are inspiration for Irish bull. And that's what, it makes sense that Chester would admire these paradoxical people, the Irish, and he honors them, I think, the best in his great poem, his epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse, that has this line, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, the great Gaels of Ireland, the men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry and all their songs are sad. The second thing that Chesterton really admires about the Irish is the way that their culture does something that is unthinkable in other countries, especially it was unthinkable in England. It was very, very unthinkable in America. For him, what he loved was the way they combined religion and politics. He was always a defender of nations, always a loyal critic of his own country, as every patriot is. Because patriotism, he says, is a natural virtue, and it's also the most practical part of any practical politics. And he understood why the Irish wanted their independence from England, and that's why he always argued for it. There's no way to know precisely the influence of Chesterton's arguments on behalf of Irish independence, but the fact is, of course, his arguments did prevail. It's interesting, though, when he visited Ireland, one of the places he visited was Belfast. And here, his analysis of the problem in Belfast is still, I think, as pertinent when he wrote about it as it has been, in recent years. There's this animosity between the Protestants and the Catholics. And the problem persists, Chesterton says, because they have approached the problem exactly backwards. the government assumes religious equality, but then they debate political equality. He said instead, he says, it's political equality that should be assumed, which means enacted, and then the religious question can actually be dealt with, because ultimately it is a religious question. And Chesterton says actually every political question is a religious question. It's a religious question, he says, that will not have an irreligious answer. And to solve the problems in Northern Ireland, he says all the solutions have been irreligious, and that's why they've led to vapid diplomacy and deplorable violence. He says it's only if they make it a religious issue that they could have a hope of solving it. He says wherever men are theological, there's some chance of them being logical. He said it was interesting. He noticed that the typical Protestant will say, I am a good Protestant, and the typical Catholic will say, I am a bad Catholic. And the contrast is apparent that he says Calvinism involves a certainty about salvation, whereas the essence of Catholicism is an uncertainty about salvation. And of course, I'm speaking to you as a former Calvinist, all right? I was a Baptist, and I started reading Chesterton, and I suffered a glorious defeat at his hands. He says, Lenin said that religion is the opium of the people, but it is only by believing in God that we can ever criticize the government. Once abolish the God, and the government becomes the God. The fact is written all across human history, but it's written most plainly across the recent history of Russia, which was created by Lenin. Lenin only fell into a slight error. He got it the wrong way around. The truth is that irreligion is the opium of the people. And wherever people do not believe in something beyond the world, they will worship the world. The third thing that Chesterton admires about the Irish people has to do with this. Imagine going to some random city, then to a random residential street, and then being deposited in a random house, and then just being left there to get along with the people who live there as well as you possibly can. It sounds like a premise for a bad television series, a bad reality TV series. But Chesterton says that's actually what happens to each of us on the day we were born. We were deposited with this strange group of people that we did not choose. We have to live with this random group of people that happens to be our family. And he says it's a good thing for a man to live in a family because it forces him to realize that life is not a thing from the outside, but a thing from the inside. It forces him to realize that life exists in spite of ourselves, and that there are modern writers who, for one reason or another, have made themselves the critics of the family, for one reason or another, for some bitterness that they may have suffered or some misfortune that they may have suffered in their own family. And so they will argue that the family is a bad institution because it's uncongenial. Chesterton responds, the family is a good institution because it is uncongenial. It's wholesome precisely because it contains all of the divergencies and varieties that there are. It is the sentimentalists who say, quite correctly, that the family is like a little kingdom. In fact, it is a little kingdom. It's the only kingdom that creates and loves its own citizens. But because it's like a little kingdom, and like any other kingdom, it sometimes resembles anarchy. It's exactly, he says, because our brother George is not interested in our religious difficulties, but is interested in the Trocadero restaurant. It's precisely because our Uncle Henry does not approve of the theatrical ambitions of our sister Sarah, that the family is like humanity. The men and women who, for good reasons or bad, revolt against the family are simply revolting against mankind. Aunt Elizabeth is unreasonable, like mankind. Papa is excitable, like mankind. Our youngest brother is mischievous, like mankind. Grandpapa is stupid, like the world. He is old, like the world. Yes, that third thing that Chesterton so admires about Ireland is that it had a deep sense of the family. He says the Irish prove that it's not the government that preserves a nation, it's the family that preserves a nation. And it's only the man for whom the family is sacred who will have any basis at all to criticize the state. And he was worried. He was worried because he saw that the family was under attack in the 20th century. He saw this pressure coming from everywhere, from every possible source of attack the family was suffering. He says he was worried because the family was starting to fade into the background and possibly even fading from the background. He saw it with the introduction first of easy divorce. Chesterton, when he went to America, he heard that Americans could be divorced for incompatibility. He said, well, then they should all be divorced. Men and women as such are incompatible, and the whole point of marriage is to work through the incompatibility. Marriage is a duel to the death. And he was also the first person that ever pointed out that there was actually a correlation, probably the only person who ever pointed out, that there was a correlation between the rise in the use of psychoanalysis and the rise in divorce. Because he said psychoanalysis is simply the confessional without absolution. But he also very, very prophetically pointed out that the acceptance of birth control, of contraception. Chesterton actually hated the term birth control. He says it was a horrible term. He says there's no birth and there's no control. But he said very prophetically, the acceptance of contraception would lead to more divorce, it would lead to abortion, it would lead to perversion. It would lead to women being treated very badly. All of the same things that Pope Paul VI said in Humanae Vitae. Chesterton was arguing the exact same things 80 years before. He says, if we don't protect the home, the whole society falls apart. The home is the ultimate place of freedom. That's where freedom exists. And that's where the focus of life should be, is on the home. And our society has completely turned that inside out. The home has become the stepping off place for the school, the job, the entertainment. Everything happens outside the home. And we have the term now in America, bedroom communities. Houses that just simply serve as a bedroom for people to sleep in at night, because there is no family life anymore. All of the life is exterior to the home, and so there's this sense of slavery that goes with that. This huge stress. Chesterton says the modern stress has made men stop desiring normal things. He says they no longer desire normal marriage. They no longer desire normal ownership. They no longer desire normal worship. And they no longer appreciate the sacredness of life itself. This is amazing. Chesterton's writing these things 100 years ago. He says that that's what the modern world has created. And it fits in well with his ideas, his political and economic ideas, which are known as distributism, which are based on Catholic social teaching. And in a nutshell, whereas capitalism emphasizes individual rights and socialism emphasizes community rights, distributism emphasizes family rights and the interests of the family. And it recognizes the family is the main unit of society, and everything in the society has to support the family. And anything that emphasizes or exalts individual rights over the family will undermine the family. Anything that exalts the community rights over the family will undermine the family. And so he sees that the great force that started to destroy the family came from a very surprising place that the modern world doesn't think about. He says, in the modern world, there's two basic relationships, he says, that are under attack. One is the relationship between a man and his wife. That's under attack. And the other is the relationship between a mother and her child. That's under attack. And he says the unnatural thing that has broken these two natural relationships apart is capitalism. You didn't expect me to say that. That's really surprising. But he says it's the very economic system that created our modern industrial society that has destroyed the family by making most people into wage slaves, working outside the home, taking not only the mother outside of the home, but also the father, so that all of their efforts are on someone else's behalf. They're working for someone else and not working for themselves. And that's broken apart the relationship between the man and his wife and the relationship between the mother and her child. He says when you break apart the family, there's only one thing that can come in and fill the void and replace the natural function of the family, and that's the state. And so his basic argument is, and this is exactly what Pope Leo XIII argues in Rerum Novarum, capitalism is breaking apart the family. Socialism is the wrong solution to the problems created by capitalism. And there are people who still think there are only two options. There's only capitalism and socialism. No, there is another option. It's based on Catholic social teaching. And the fact is, as Chesterton and his friend Belloc point out, it's not a matter of capitalism or socialism. We are living under both of them. Chesterton calls them Hudge and Gudge, big government and big business. And big government and big business together undermine the family. They both attack Jones. Hudge and Gudge both attack Jones. I could probably say Casey instead or something. Jones is probably too English a name. And so his solution is we have to, Pope Leo's solution and what Chesterton built on is the idea that people should become owners. They should own as much as possible their own means of production, their own income. The opposite to employment, he says, is not unemployment. The opposite to employment is independence. And unfortunately, he says, under a society where most of the people are working as wage slaves, working for someone else, you have two things. You have the very few employers and the very many employed. And it's always going to create an imbalance in society. And the employed, he says, will never have enough money. And they won't be able to afford their basic needs. And they're going to have to borrow, and they're going to have to go in debt. And you'll create a huge debt that will help crush the family. And there's all kinds of things that have added to that debt. One of them, of course, is education. which has become a monstrous debt to working people. And the horrible thing about that debt is they don't get anything for it. They pay all this money to send their kids to school, and the kids don't even get an education. But they do get a debt. They get essentially a mortgage without a house. And so that's part of the reason why these social economic ideas of the church, and especially as they are expressed by Chesterton and articulated by Chesterton, really need to be taken very seriously. It's one of the last things people want to talk about when it comes to G.K. Chesterton, but it really is the basis for the solution to the problems that face the modern world right now. It's the way to restore the family. But in the meantime, we have to do as many things as we can to strengthen the family. We have to understand that everything in the world needs to serve the family. And in our jobs, in our purchases, in our educational decisions, we have to always think, what's best for my family? Because if the family is strong, the nation is strong. And the parents are the most natural force there is in the lives of children. And what we have done by separating that natural force, he says it's like standing in the rain with an umbrella and watering a plant. We've taken away the natural way of raising our children, which is having parents do it, and we've given all these functions to someone else. And it's only going to make the state bigger and more intrusive in every aspect of our lives, unless we take control of these things ourselves. He says the first things must be the very foundations of life, love and birth and babyhood, and these are always covered fountains, flowing in the quiet courts of the home. To make the human family happy is the only possible object of all education, as of all civilization. Most human experience shows, or goes to show, that the more a family is really a family, the better it is. That is, the more that it really consists of mother, father, and children. And of course, religion for Chesterton is a family affair, because we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven. We pray, Hail Mary, full of grace. And he predicted, Chesterton said, that there is a new dark ages was coming, that the barbarians are on the rise. And in the previous time that the Dark Ages came, it was the church, the monasteries that protected civilization, that protected culture, that saved learning, saved education. And they were the bulwarks against the barbarians. Chesterton says they were the only light in the Dark Ages. They were the light that carried civilization through the Dark Ages. He predicts that in the coming Dark Ages, because he noticed that the monasteries were not as strong as they used to be. He said in the coming Dark Ages, he said, it's going to have to be the family that plays the role that the monasteries played in the Dark Ages. That the family would have to protect culture and save art and save beauty and save civilization and pass truth from one generation to the next, which is the only function of education, is passing truth from one generation to the next. Because all those things, he said, are going to collapse in the outside world. A lot of people don't remember this and don't think about this, but Thomas More was canonized in the 1930s during Chesterton's lifetime, some 400 years after his martyrdom. And when he was canonized, G.K. Chesterton says Thomas More is more important now than he was in his own lifetime, because he defended not only the church against the state, he defended the family against the state. And he says Thomas More will be more important in the future than he is now. He said that in 1930. Well, I'm standing up here before you today, coming all the way from America to Dublin, and telling you that G.K. Chesterton is more important now than he was in his own lifetime. And he'll probably be more important in the future than he is now. And an interesting thing has just happened. The Bishop of Northampton in England has appointed an investigator to start looking into the potential cause for G.K. Chesterton. And I actually have some prayer cards with me. And I'm not even going to sell them. So I'd be happy to just take one and pass them around, please. And I have some more, but it's a very, very, there's been an interesting reaction already to the idea of Chesterton being a saint. I could tell you that G.K. Chesterton led me to the Catholic Church, as he's led many others to the Catholic Church. But he really is an inspiration and an example of what lay spirituality is supposed to look like. Someone who lived a life in the secular world, writing for the secular papers, and yet lived a life of goodness and holiness and truth. And people were drawn to that truth, and they were drawn to that goodness, and they were affected by that holiness. And I also think it's just an absolutely wonderful image to have a 300-pound cigar-smoking journalist wearing a halo. Thank you very much.